Hey everyone, welcome to my coffee table series. Hopefully I give you guys enough tips and tricks that you can build beautiful coffee tables just like this one, just like I did, in a simple workshop without any really complicated tools. I hope you enjoy them. So for sanding, the idea is same as always. We get a really rough grit. We're going to wipe off all the resin that I put on the top here with it and just bring the whole table down to a nice smooth surface. There are areas where when I was leveling the router bit made slight indents. We're going to level all of that out. Then we're just going to go up in grit progression all the way up to probably 800. From 240 onwards, we're really focusing more on the resin areas to get them nice and smooth, not so much on the wood. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try something different. In between every single grit progression, I give it a wipe down with spirits. So this is something I saw on one of the YouTube tutorials, and what this does is get rid of all the dust on the surface and it stops clogging, and apparently gives you a much better sand on the next grit. So we'll be going 80, 120, 180 I think, or 150, 240, 400, 800, then 2 levels of paste on the resin areas just to polish them out. Another cool little tip when you're sanding, take a pencil, keep this in your little arsenal with your sanding stuff, and before you sand, you just mark your table with a pencil, not too hard, just go over it, and now you go through with your sander, and once you've removed the pencil line, you move on, so you get a nice even sand, you don't end up with little indents. That's a cool tip. Another cool tip I learned on the internet from good old YouTube: buy one of these belt cleaning sticks. These are usually used for belt sanders and drum sanders, but you can also use them for your normal sander. And what you do is, when your sander gets all clogged up with crap from the wood, sandpaper and resin dust, you just clean it off, switch it on obviously, clean it off with this, makes your pads nice and new, and they last 3 or 4 times longer than the normal ones. You just don't have to chuck them away at all. Okay, again here I'm condensing the fun task of sanding into a few seconds. This was really probably at least a couple of hours of work. Here I'm just doing the 80 grit and the 120 grit just to get the tables to a level where I can do a bit more finishing, then come back to the final sanding afterwards. Right, so I guess now everything's been sanded down. Next thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to square these 4 edges off exactly perfectly, 100% 90 degrees, and make sure that they're nice and straight, true. Firstly go around with the saw, just trim off maybe 1 mil, and then I'm going to go around with the router using the edge trimming bit with a perfect straight edge underneath, and just make sure that's really smooth. Then we can get the bevels done and everything and sand it all off, and ready for the legs. Looking good. Okay, so I've measured out all my pieces to cut the legs. We're going to have some uprights here. Oh, that's going to go across, and it's all going to be 45 degree meters. And then I'll just show you quickly how I measured them. Really easy to get your angles and stuff right. You just plonk that under where you're going to want it to go, which will be pretty much on the edge there. I mark a line on that side and I mark a line on that side. which you can see on the ends. Then you just take the thickness of the wood, which is going to be upright against it, butt it up against that line, and make a mark on the inside. On this side, same, butt it up against the line on the outside, draw a line on the inside. There we go. We know we have to cut from there heading out, and we know we have to cut from there heading out, which the saw is all set up for. Let's do it! Alright, so I've cut 1, 2, 4 miters using the technique that I had. I tilted the saw down, basically like that, cut through my miter that way, and realized they don't fit perfectly. I then spent about 6 hours trying to calibrate my saw perfectly, and unfortunately it's just not high-end enough to calibrate properly, so I gave up on that idea and instead calibrated it perfectly to run a 90-degree cut. And then I built a little jig that I'll show you for holding the wood at 45 degrees, and that gives me a perfect miter join. I think these ones are salvageable because the angle is such that it actually needs a bit of correction into the wood, which means I can fix them up. We're going to try that now. So that's the new jig, and you'll notice it has a right and a left brace, and they're exactly 90 degrees and they're exactly 45 degrees from the fence. And the reason I have a left and a right is, as I'll explain now, I've marked each of my pieces of wood as left or right. What that does is it allows me to have a little bit of an error in the cut. So if I'm not quite at 45 degrees on the blade, or at least if the blade's not quite true, it'll even out because the angle is 90 degrees and I'm putting one on the left and one on the right. So even if that angle in the middle there was 30 degrees, it would still cut a 30 on one side and a 60 on the other, and in total we'd get a 90-degree cut. Hope that makes sense.